That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The fog clung to Salisbury Plain like a shroud, thick and unyielding, muting the first light of dawn. It was the sort of morning that tested even the steadiest nerves in the British Army. Visibility down to a few meters, the ground sodden underfoot from overnight drizzle, and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and damp wool. Out on the expansive training area, a convoy exercise was underway, part of the standard rotation for the infantry battalions stationed nearby at Bulford Camp. Lorries and Land Rovers snaked along the rutted tracks, their engines rumbling low against the hush of the mist. This was no Hollywood spectacle. It was the quiet grind of preparation, where soldiers learned to move as one under simulated pressure, honing the discipline that kept the peace in far-off places. Sergeant Ellis wiped condensation from his visor, his breath steady as he scanned the lead vehicle. He was a veteran of the 3rd Battalion, the rifles broad-shouldered and unassuming, with the clipped accent of the Midlands that carried no room for complaint. Beside him in the cab sat Private Laura Hale, the unit's designated marksman, though few called her that to her face. At 28, she was one of the few women in the sniper section, her frame slight but wiry, her dark hair pulled back under her helmet in a tight bun. She said little, her eyes always fixed on the horizon, rifle cradled across her lap like an extension of herself. The others respected her aim in the field, but off it, she was the quiet one, the one who faded into the background during briefings or in the mess tent. No one knew much about her past beyond the basics. Joined up young, served in logistics before requalifying for sniper school. She volunteered for the long watches, the solitary positions, and that suited everyone fine. The convoy pressed on, a dozen vehicles strong, simulating a resupply run through contested terrain. Radios crackled with terse updates. All clear ahead. Maintain spacing. The fog muffled the words, turning the exercise into a lesson in trust. Trust in your mates, in the chain of command, in the routines that bound them all. Lance Corporal Jenkins, driving the vehicle behind Hale's, had been ribbing her earlier over the comms, his voice light but edged with the barracks humor that passed for camaraderie. "Hale, you spotting ghosts out there in the mist? Or just daydreaming about tea and biscuits back at base?" She'd not replied, as was her way, her silence drawing a chuckle from the others. It wasn't malice, not really, just the way of it in the ranks, where the quiet ones bore the brunt of the chatter to keep spirits up. Major Hargrove commanded from the rear, his voice steady over the net, a product of Sandhurst's unyielding polish. He was due for rotation to a staff post soon, and this exercise was his last before handover. The plan was simple: navigate the plane's mock ambush points, respond to simulated threats, and extract without a hitch. Salisbury Plain stretched for miles, its undulating downs scarred by decades of training. Trenches from the Great War still visible in places, now overgrown and forgotten. The fog made it otherworldly, the world reduced to the narrow beam of headlights and the faint outlines of gorse bushes. As the convoy crested a low rise, the first sign of trouble came not with a bang, but a whisper. A flare popped in the distance, orange against the grey, marking the start of the opposition forces' play. "Enemy contact. Simulated." The umpire's voice confirmed over the radio. "Convoy surrounded. Hold position." The vehicles halted in a ragged line, engines idling as squads dismounted, weapons at the ready. It was textbook. Form a perimeter, assess, counter. But the fog played tricks, swallowing sounds and shapes, turning the exercise into something unnervingly real. Private Hale slipped from her vehicle without a word, her movements fluid and unhurried. She shouldered her L115A3 rifle, the long barrel vanishing into the mist as she moved to a vantage point on a slight embankment. The others fanned out around her, Jenkins barking orders to his fire team, Ellis coordinating from the center. "Eyes sharp, lads. Can't see a bloody thing." Tension rippled through the group, the sort that came from uncertainty, not fear. This was training, after all. No real rounds, no lives at stake. Yet the isolation gnawed at them, the fog pressing in like an uninvited guest. From the mist ahead, shapes emerged, opposition players in drab camouflage, advancing in a loose skirmish line. They were from another battalion, their umpires calling the hits. But something felt off. The enemy weren't following the script. They closed too quickly, too aggressively, cutting off the flanks. Radios buzzed with confusion. "They're on us already, that's not the drill." Jenkins swore under his breath, his team pinned behind the lorries. "Hargrove, sir, we've got multiple contacts bearing 050. Request permission to engage." The Major's response was calm, authoritative. "Negative. Hold fire until visual. Hale, report from your position." She didn't answer immediately, her scope sweeping the grey veil. In the silence, Jenkins glanced her way, irritation flickering in his eyes. "Come on, Hale. Don't leave us hanging. You up there napping?" A few muffled laughs from the line, the tension breaking for a moment in that familiar way. She remained still, prone now on the damp grass, her cheek welded to the stock. No retort, no movement, just the quiet focus that marked her, even as the mockery hung in the air. Deeper in the fog, unseen, a visiting element had arrived unannounced. A small SAS cadre from Credenhill, up for a joint observation exercise, had been shadowing the convoy from the tree line. They were ghosts in the mist, 4 operators in muted greens, their presence noted only by the umpires. Captain Thorne led them, a lean figure with the haunted eyes of someone who'd seen the regiment's shadows up close. He'd requested the watch to assess integration tactics, but now, as the exercise tightened, his gaze fixed on the lone figure on the embankment. Hale. Her posture was textbook, but something in the way she adjusted her aim, deliberate, economical, stirred a memory. A faint scar on her hand, visible as she steadied the rifle, caught the dim light. Thorne said nothing, his team mirroring his stillness. In the SAS, questions waited. Observation came first. The opposition pressed closer, their simulated fire hitting 2 vehicles on the wing. Shouts rose from the convoy. "Man down! Flanks exposed!" Jenkins scrambled to cover, frustration boiling over. "Hale! For God's sake, give us a sit-rep!" Still she held, her world narrowed to the crosshairs. The fog swirled, and in that suspended moment, the crack appeared, not in the ranks, but in the rhythm of command itself. Orders clashed with instinct, routine buckling under the weight of the unseen. Hargrove's voice cut through. "All units consolidate. Hale, take the shot if clear." She exhaled once, slow and controlled, and the world shifted. But that was for the moments to come. For now the plane held its breath, the rain beginning to patter softly on helmets and scopes alike. The rain had picked up by the time the umpires called a brief stand-down, the droplets drumming a steady rhythm on the canvas covers of the halted vehicles. Salisbury Plain, vast and unforgiving, seemed to absorb the sound, leaving only the faint hiss of idling engines and the occasional cough from a soldier shaking off the chill. Private Hale remained prone on the embankment, her rifle still trained into the fog, unmoving as the opposition force pulled back to reset. She was a fixture in these exercises, always the last to rise, her focus a quiet anchor amid the bustle. No one questioned it aloud. It was simply Hale's way, the sort of reliability that went unnoticed until it was needed. Sergeant Ellis approached her position first, his boots sinking slightly into the sodden turf. He was the steady hand of the section, 20 years in the rifles, his face weathered by tours in Helmand and Estonia. "Hale, on your feet. Umpires want to regroup in 5. His tone was even, carrying the no-nonsense cadence of a man who'd long since learned to conserve words. She acknowledged him with a nod, rising fluidly, the rifle slung over her shoulder, as if it weighed nothing. Water beaded on her camouflage smock, but she paid it no mind, falling in with the others as they formed up beside the lead Land Rover. The convoy's corps was the 3rd Battalion's Bravo Company, a mix of seasoned non-commissioned officers and fresh-faced privates, all bound by the unyielding structure of military life. Lance Corporal Jenkins, Hale's perennial sparring partner in banter, wiped mud from his visor and shot her a glance. He was from Cardiff, his accent softened by years in the ranks, but his humour sharp as a bayonet. "Bloody hell, Hale, you planning to marry that rifle? We've been out here an hour and not a peep from you." A ripple of low chuckles from the fire team, Privates Carter and Ruiz, both on their first plane exercise, exchanging looks that masked their own unease in the mist. Hale said nothing, her eyes scanning the horizon as she checked her kit with methodical precision. Magazine seated. Bolt slick from the rain but functional, scope lenses clear. It was this silence that marked her, a barrier as impenetrable as the fog. She'd joined the battalion 2 years prior, transferring from a logistics unit after passing sniper selection, with scores that turned heads in the armored corps. But here, in the infantry's rough weave, she was the outsider, the woman who volunteered for Overwatch, who ate alone in the corner of the cookhouse, who never joined the post-exercise pints at the NAFI. Whispers followed her, too reserved, too intense. Jenkins called it Hale's Fog, a private joke that had caught on. Major Hargrove emerged from the command vehicle, his presence straightening spines without a word. Tall and erect, with the faint lines of command etched around his eyes, he was the embodiment of the officer class, Sandhurst through and through, his orders delivered in that measured baritone that brooked no debate. Right, listen in. The company fell quiet, a semicircle around him on the dripping grass. Fog's lifting slightly, but we'll adjust the scenario. Our position will simulate a breakthrough attempt on the eastern flank. Hale, you'll hold high ground. Jenkins, your team's on suppression. Ellis, coordinate the extraction. Questions? None came. This was the rhythm of their days. Briefings crisp as a salute. Roles assigned by rank and aptitude. Hargrove's gaze lingered on Hale for a beat longer than usual, noting her steady posture. But he moved on without comment. In the British Army, competence spoke for itself. It didn't need fanfare. The major turned to the umpires, 2 warrant officers from Battalion HQ, their clipboards sodden but resolute. Carry on. As the group dispersed, the routines reasserted themselves with mechanical efficiency. Soldiers checked weapons, redistributing ammo pouches and ensuring radios were synced. The smell of wet earth mingled with the faint tang of gun oil, the plane's ancient barrows looming like silent sentinels in the thinning mist. Carter, the youngest private, sidled up to Hale as she adjusted her ghillie hood. Private, how do you spot through this lot? Feels like we're blind." She met his eyes briefly, her expression neutral. "Patience. Listen more than you look." It was the most she'd said all morning, her voice low and precise, carrying the faint lilt of the Welsh borders. Carter nodded, impressed despite himself, but before he could reply, Jenkins clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't mind Hale, she's saving her words for the Queen. Come on, lad, grab your position." The mockery was light, the sort that greased the wheels of unit cohesion, but it landed as it always did, Hale absorbing it without a flicker. She moved to her assigned vantage, a shallow depression in the rise, settling in with the ease of long practice. From here, the convoy stretched out below, lorries buttoned up, sentries posted at intervals, the whole apparatus of simulated warfare humming with restrained energy. Ellis oversaw the final checks, his sergeant's authority quiet but absolute. Spacing good, eyes front, no raised voices, no dramatics, just the clipped efficiency that defined them. Unseen in the tree line to the west, the SAS observers maintained their vigil. Captain Thorne, with his 2 sergeants and a signaller, had positioned themselves to assess the infantry's response under duress. The regiment's involvement was routine, cross-pollination with line units, sharing the subtle arts of observation without fanfare. Thorne's face was impassive, binoculars trained on the embankment. Hale's form blended seamlessly with the terrain, her movements economical, betraying nothing. But as she shifted to peer through her scope, the scar on her hand caught the light again. A thin, deliberate line, like the mark of a field dressing applied in haste. One of his sergeants, a grizzled veteran named Brooks, leaned in slightly. "That one. Seen that poise before." Thorne held up a gloved hand, silencing him. In the SAS, speculation was a luxury. Facts emerged in their own time. The umpire's whistle pierced the air, signaling resumption. "Convoy, advance on my mark. Opposition inbound." Engines growled back to life, the vehicles lurching forward into the lingering fog. Hale's world narrowed once more, the rifle's weight familiar against her shoulder. Jenkins' voice crackled over the net. "Hale, try not to get lost up there. We might need you this time." Laughter from the line, but she was already gone, breath steady, senses attuned to the plane's subtle shifts. The rustle of wind through gorse, the distant thud of boots. The exercise pressed on, the hierarchy intact, the quiet competence of the ranks holding firm against the gathering pressure. Yet beneath the routine, a subtle fracture lingered. Hargrove, from his perch in the command vehicle, noted the banter's edge, the way Hale's silence invited it. He'd seen her range scores, exceptional even by sniper standards, but integration was another matter. The army was changing, women in combat roles now standard, but old habits died hard. As the fog swirled anew, concealing the opposition's approach, he keyed the radio. "All units maintain discipline, this is what we train for." Hale heard it all, her position elevated but isolated. The rain eased to a mist, the plain's vastness unfolding like a challenge unspoken. In the ranks below, orders flowed, positions held, the British way enduring. But the test was building, invisible threads pulling taut, waiting for the moment when silence would demand more than endurance. The opposition force struck from the eastern flank with a suddenness that shattered the fragile calm, their simulated advance materializing out of the thinning fog like specters from the plain's ancient mists. Shouts erupted along the convoy line as umpires marked hits with colored smoke, red plumes blooming against the gray, forcing two vehicles to a halt and scattering the fire teams into cover. Private Hale, entrenched on her embankment, tracked the lead enemy through her scope, the crosshairs steady despite the chill seeping through her smock. The L-115A3's bipod dug into the damp soil, anchoring her as the world below devolved into controlled chaos. Engines revved in reverse, lorries grinding over ruts to reform the perimeter, while Jenkins' team laid down blank fire suppression, the sharp cracks echoing flatly in the mist. Sergeant Ellis barked coordinates over the net, his voice a lifeline amid the din. "Contact 300 meters bearing 180, flank secure, hold the line." Major Hargrove, from the command vehicle, directed the response with the precision of a man who'd drilled this 100 times. "Jenkins, push your left, Hale, overwatch, neutralize the spotter if visual." But the fog clung stubbornly, veiling the opposition's positions, turning the exercise into a test of nerve as much as tactics. Hale's breath fogged the eyepiece briefly. She wiped it clear, adjusting for the wind that whispered across the downs. Her finger hovered near the trigger, waiting for the clear shot that protocol demanded. Down below, the pressure mounted. Jenkins' fire team was pinned behind a stricken lorry, the enemy closing to within 50 meters, their umpires advancing with clipboards raised to call further casualties. Private Carter took a simulated round to the leg, dropping with a theatrical groan, while Ruiz scrambled to drag him to cover. Jenkins, sweat beading under his helmet despite the cold, keyed his radio furiously. "Hargrove, sir, they're overrunning us. Hale's got eyes. Tell her to bloody well fire." The Major's reply was measured. "Patience, Lance Corporal. She's got the high ground." But frustration boiled in Jenkins' voice, the isolation gnawing at him. He glanced up towards the embankment, Hale's form a faint silhouette against the overcast sky. "Hale, report, damn it. We're hanging out here because of you lot up top." The words carried on the wind, laced with the raw edge of exertion, and a few heads turned in the line. Ellis pausing mid-order, Hargrove's brow furrowing slightly. It wasn't outright insubordination, but it skirted close, the barracks humor twisting under strain into something sharper. Hale heard it, of course. Her earpiece crackled with the exchange. Yet she held position, scope sweeping methodically, ignoring the pull to respond. Silence was her discipline, forged in the long hours of selection where words were ammunition best saved. The opposition spotter emerged briefly, a figure in drab with a radio, and she exhaled, squeezing the trigger. The blank round's report was muffled by the fog, the umpire waving it good, but the relief below was fleeting. Another hit on the flank, and Jenkins' temper snapped. He rose from cover, grabbing Ruiz by the collar to haul him back, then turned towards the rise. "Hale, you deaf up there? We're getting chewed up waiting for your ghost act." His shout drew murmurs from the perimeter, the other squads exchanging glances, some amused, others uneasy. Carter, playing wounded nearby, winced at the volume. Ellis shot Jenkins a warning look, his sergeant's authority reasserting, "Stow it, Jenkins, focus on your sector." But the lance corporal, adrenaline surging, pressed on, striding a few paces upslope as if to bridge the distance. In his haste, he snatched at Hale's rucksack strap, dangling from where she'd left it low on the embankment, a rough tug to get her attention, the fabric tearing slightly under his grip. "Oi, wake up, this isn't a solo vigil." The act hung in the air, a violation small but stark in the rigid code of the ranks. Grabbing Kit unbidden, especially from a sniper in position, breached the unspoken trust. No one touched another's gear without cause, lest it compromise the line. Hale finally stirred, lowering her rifle fractionally, her eyes meeting Jenkins over the sights. There was no fire in her gaze, no retort, just a steady, unblinking regard that spoke volumes in its restraint. She shook the strap free with a subtle twist of her wrist, resuming her scan without a word. The fog seemed to thicken around them, swallowing the moment, but it lingered like damp rot in the unit's cohesion. Hargrove's voice cut through the net, clipped and authoritative. "Cease chatter. All units consolidate on my mark." The major had seen it, the tug, the silence, and his jaw tightened imperceptibly. Women in the infantry were no novelty now, but the old frictions persisted, amplified under duress. He made a note in his log, the pen scratching faintly against paper, but said nothing aloud. Discipline held, repercussions waited for after-action. Ellis moved to intercept Jenkins, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. "Back in line, lad. You've got enough on your plate without borrowing trouble." Jenkins muttered an apology under his breath, cheeks flushing as he retreated, the fire team's rhythm disrupted for a beat. From the tree line, Captain Thorne observed it all, his binoculars unwavering. The SAS cadre remained statue still, the rain pattering on their hoods like Morse code. Brooks, the sergeant beside him, shifted minutely. "That's no ordinary overwatch. The way she didn't flinch reminds me of that op in the Balkans." Thorne's response was a barely perceptible nod, his mind turning over the scar, the poise, the unbroken focus. The regiment knew its own. Anomalies like Hale didn't arise from nowhere. But they watched, as always, letting the plane unfold its truths. The exercise ground on, the opposition feinting a withdrawal only to probe again, forcing the convoy into a tighter defensive knot. Hale's shots, precise, economical, began to tell, umpires calling kills that eased the pressure on the flanks. Jenkins' team rallied, their suppression fire syncing with her overwatch, the unit's machinery humming once more. Yet the incident echoed subtly, glances averted from Hale, Ruiz offering her a quiet thumbs up when they rotated positions, Carter falling silent on the banter. The rain intensified, turning the tracks to slurry, the scent of wet peat rising as the fog lifted in patches. Salisbury Plain, with its barrows and battle scars, bore witness to these fractures, the quiet humiliations that tested resolve more than any simulated assault. Hargrove called a final stand-down as dusk crept in, the light fading to a bruised purple over the downs. Vehicles idled, soldiers emerging stiff-limbed to debrief under the dripping canvas. Hale slung her rifle, descending the embankment with the same unhurried grace, her smock caked in mud. No one approached her directly. The mockery's aftertaste soured the air. Jenkins busied himself with kit checks, avoiding her eye, while Ellis pulled her aside briefly. "Solid work up top, ignore the noise." She nodded, expression neutral, the weight of the day settling like the gathering dark. In the command tent later, as mugs of tea steamed against the chill, the umpires reviewed the logs. Thorne's team slipped away unnoticed, their assessment filed for Credenhill's archives. The plane quieted, the rain a steady drum on the tent fly, but the test had etched itself into the ranks, a silent challenge to the hierarchy's unyielding frame. Hale sat apart, cleaning her rifle by torchlight, the bolt cycling with rhythmic clicks. Silence as ever was her reply, but beneath it, the threads of something deeper began to pull. "Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach." The debrief tent on Salisbury Plain stood resilient against the evening drizzle, its canvas walls sagging under the weight of accumulated moisture, the air inside thick with the aroma of instant coffee and damp wool. Lanterns cast a warm, flickering glow over the assembled ranks of Bravo Company, shadows dancing across faces etched with the day's exertions. Major Hargrove presided at the head of the trestle table, his notebook open. pen poised as he reviewed the umpire's notes with the methodical precision expected of a Sandhurst graduate. The company sat in orderly rows on folding chairs, sergeants to the front, privates filling the rear, posture straight despite the fatigue settling into their bones. This was the British Army's way, reflection before rest, lessons drawn in the quiet aftermath. Private Hale occupied a seat near the edge, her rifle disassembled on the bench beside her, components laid out for cleaning with the care of ritual. She worked methodically, cloth gliding over the barrel, her movements betraying none of the strain from hours prone in the mud. Sergeant Ellis sat nearby, nursing a mug, his eyes occasionally flicking her way, not with pity, but the steady regard of a man who recognized endurance when he saw it. Lance Corporal Jenkins, further along the row, kept his gaze fixed on the floor, the earlier outburst hanging over him like the low clouds outside. No one mentioned it outright. In the ranks, such lapses were addressed in private, the hierarchy's machinery turning without fanfare. Hargrove cleared his throat, his voice carrying the clipped authority that silenced the murmurs. Right, let's have it. Strengths first. The perimeter held under simulated overrun, and Overwatch provided key neutralizations. Hale, your positioning bought us time on the eastern flank. Heads nodded, a few glances towards her, but she merely inclined her head, acknowledging without elaboration. The Major continued, flipping a page. Areas for improvement. Communication lapses under pressure. Jenkins, your team's suppression was solid, but the net chatter bordered on excessive. Discipline in the fog is paramount. Visibility low, voices carry further than you think. Jenkins shifted, his cheeks coloring faintly under the lantern light. Understood, sir. Won't happen again. His tone was contrite, the Welsh lilt subdued, and Ellis gave him a subtle nod of approval. The debrief flowed on. Umpires interjecting with timestamps from their logs, the moment the opposition breached at 14:30 hours, the effective shift to defensive not at 14:45. It was all very proper, the sort of review that reinforced the chain of command without raising voices. Outside, the rain pattered steadily on the tent pegs, mingling with the distant lowing of livestock from the plains fringes, a reminder that this was training ground, not battlefield. As the session wound towards its close, a subtle shift occurred at the tent flap. Captain Thorne entered unannounced, his SAS cadre filing in behind him like shadows detaching from the night. They were 4 in total, Thorne at the lead, lean and unremarkable in his subdued camouflage. Sergeant Brooks, broad-shouldered with the faint scars of service etched into his knuckles. Corporal Vance, the signaller, carrying a compact radio pack, and the quietist, a trooper named Reed, whose eyes scanned the room with the habitual wariness of the regiment. No salutes exchanged, no need. Their presence was noted by the umpires with a brief nod, Hargrove rising to greet them with a firm handshake. Captain. Your observations. Thorne's response was measured, his accent carrying the neutral tones of central England, honed by years in Credenhill's halls. Appreciated, Major. Joint exercise protocol. Will contribute to the AAR if required. He took a seat at the table's end, his team dispersing to the periphery, blending into the company's edges without drawing attention. In the SAS, arrival was never theatrical. They observed, assessed, and departed like mist over the Y. But tonight, Thorne's gaze lingered on Hale, who continued her maintenance oblivious or unconcerned. The scar on her hand, visible now as she oiled the bolt carrier, drew his eye again. A precise line curving from thumb to wrist, the mark of a hasty suture under field conditions. The debrief resumed, Hargrove soliciting input from the sections. Ellis spoke first, outlining the fire team's adaptations, his words economical. Jenkins followed, detailing the flank pressure, his earlier frustration channeled into tactical critique. When it came to Overwatch, the Major turned to Hale. Private, your perspective on the visual challenges. She paused, setting down her cloth, her voice emerging low and steady, laced with that borderland inflection. Fog reduced effective range to 200 meters, sir. Wind shear from the east, complicated holds, adjusted by 3 clicks, held fire until spotter confirmed to avoid blue on blue. It was concise, professional, revealing nothing personal. Nods rippled through the tent. Even Jenkins glanced her way with grudging respect. Thorne listened, his expression impassive, but Brooks leaned imperceptibly closer to Vance, murmuring under the cover of the discussion. "That scar matches the profile from Op Thornwood, Balkans 009. Sniper support embedded with us." Vance, younger but no less seasoned, replied with a fractional shake of his head. "Classified. But the poise. She's not line infantry bred." Reed, stationed near the flap, simply watched, his stillness a hallmark of the regiment's training. They knew better than to speculate aloud. Observation built the case, piece by quiet piece. Thorne's mind turned over fragments, the economical rifle handling, the unyielding focus during the grab incident earlier. Witnessed from afar, the tug on the strap met with restraint that echoed SAS selections trials. Hargrove wrapped the session, dismissing the company with a crisp, "Carry on. Kit check at 0600. Soldiers rose, chairs scraping softly, the tent filling with the rustle of movement as mugs were stacked and rifles reassembled. Hale packed her components with the same precision, slinging the cleaned L115A3 over her shoulder before stepping into the night. The rain had eased to a fine mist, the plain's expanse swallowing the lantern light, leaving only the crunch of boots on gravel paths back to the temporary bivouacs. Jenkins fell in with Carter and Ruiz, their conversation low, banter subdued, the day's edge blunted by fatigue. "Fair play to her up top," Carter muttered. "Saved our asses a few times." Jenkins grunted noncommittally, the weight of his lapse settling. Thorne's team lingered in the tent, poring over a shared tablet with the umpires, tactical overlays of the exercise, timestamps marked. But the captain's focus strayed to a still image pulled from their discrete footage. Hale on the embankment, profile sharp against the fog, hand steady on the foregrip. "Run a trace on her service record," he said quietly to Vance, voice pitched below the ongoing chatter. "Discreet, through channels." Vance nodded, fingers tapping silently. In the regiment, such inquiries were routine, but this felt different. A thread from the shadows pulling into view. Outside, Hale walked alone to her allocated bell tent, the mist beading on her helmet like dew. The camp was a cluster of low silhouettes, guy ropes taut, generators humming faintly, the scent of wet canvas and cooking fires mingling in the air. She ducked inside, the space shared with 3 other privates from the section, their sleeping bags unrolled on the ground sheet. No greetings exchanged. Exhaustion dictated silence. Hale stripped her smock, hanging it to dry, the scar on her hand catching the dim beam of her headlamp. A reminder, faded but indelible, from a night in the Balkans, where fog had concealed more than opposition. She settled onto her bag, staring at the tent's ceiling, the day's humiliations replaying in measured beats. The shout, the grab, the unyielding watch from afar. Miles distant, at Credenhill's secure wing, Thorne's initial query would ping through encrypted lines, stirring archives long sealed. But here on the plain, the night deepened, the rain a soft percussion on the earth. The hierarchy held its form, ranks intact, routines unbroken. But the observer's arrival had introduced a subtle current, like the first stirrings of wind before a shift. Hale closed her eyes, breath evening out, her silence a fortress against the encroaching questions. The plain slumbered, its ancient ridges guarding secrets as old as the barrows, waiting for dawn to reveal what the fog had hidden. Dawn broke over Salisbury Plain with the reluctance of a reluctant recruit, the sky a uniform slate grey, the mist lingering in the hollows like smoke from a dying fire. The camp stirred to life under the weight of routine, generators coughing into gear, the clatter of mess tins as breakfast was distributed from the mobile kitchen, the low murmur of voices blending with the patter of residual rain on tent flies. Bravo Company moved with the mechanical precision of long habit, kit inspections in the open square, rifles shouldered, boots polished to a subdued gleam despite the mud. Private Hale emerged from her bell tent early, her movements unhurried, the L115A3 slung across her back as she joined the formation. The scar on her hand was hidden now under a fresh glove, but its memory pressed against her skin like an old wound. Sergeant Ellis conducted the muster, his voice carrying across the gravel parade with the crisp economy of command. Fall in by sections, rifles present. The company snapped to attention, a ripple of disciplined alignment under the major's watchful eye from the command tent's flap. Jenkins stood rigid in his place, gaze forward, the previous day's lapse a shadow he carried without complaint. No words had passed between him and Hale since the embankment. The ranks absorbed such frictions, letting time and duty smooth the edges. Hargrove emerged fully now, notebook in hand, preparing for the morning's continuation of the exercise, a live-fire integration phase, umpires on hand to oversee the escalation. The SAS cadre materialized from the tree line as if conjured by the lifting fog, their vehicles, discreet Land Rovers with no markings, parking at the periphery without fanfare. Captain Thorne dismounted first, his team following in silence, kit minimal, packs, sidearms, the quiet assurance of men who operated beyond the line unit's gaze. They approached the muster with nods to the umpires, Thorne exchanging a brief word with Hargrove. "Captain, ready for the observation phase?" the major asked, his tone professional, betraying no curiosity about their extended stay. Thorne's reply was even. "Affirmative, sir. We'll embed with Overwatch, if permitted." Hargrove assented with a gesture, the hierarchy accommodating the regiment's needs without question. As the company dispersed to staging areas, Hale received her assignment, elevated position on the western rise, coordinating with a spotter from the signals section. She moved off alone, traversing the rutted path to the vantage, the plain unfolding below in its vast, scarred expanse, trenches from forgotten maneuvers, half filled with overnight water, gorse clumps standing sentinel. The air held the sharp tang of wet concrete from the distant range huts, mingling with the earthy scent of the downs. Her breath came steady, the rifle's weight a familiar companion, but an undercurrent of unease stirred as she settled into position. The trace Thorne had ordered the night before had yielded fragments in Credenhill's secure vaults. Laura Hale, formerly attached to a joint intelligence task force in the Balkans 2009, embedded support for Operation Thornwood, a classified extraction under fog-shrouded hills where a lone Overwatch had neutralized threats that saved an SAS patrol from ambush. Her record redacted post-mission, reassigned to logistics to fade into obscurity. The scar, a graze from shrapnel during the exfil stitched in the field by a regiment medic. Thorne knew the details now. The question was revelation. The exercise commenced with the crack of the starting flare, the convoy reforming on the tracks below, engines rumbling as squads mounted up. Simulated opposition would probe from multiple vectors this time, the umpires' smoke markers ready to simulate casualties. Hale's scope swept the horizon, picking out the faint outlines of enemy positions in the residual haze. Below, Jenkins' team took point in a forward vehicle, their banter muted over the net. Lessons from the debrief holding firm. "Eyes sharp, lads. No repeats," Ellis reminded, his voice a steady anchor. Tension built as the first contacts materialized, blanks firing in staccato bursts, forcing the convoy into a hasty halt. Umpires advanced, calling hits that thinned the line, a lorry disabled, Jenkins' team dismounting to establish a firing line. The fog from the previous day had burned off, but the plain's undulations concealed movements, turning the ground into a labyrinth of sightlines. Hale reported sightings crisply. "Contact, 400 meters bearing 270, her voice threading the net without flourish. A spotter joined her briefly, a young corporal from signals, but she directed him with quiet efficiency, her focus unbroken. From a concealed observation post 50 meters downslope, Thorne and Brooks watched, their binoculars trained on her form. The captain's face remained impassive, but his gloved hand tightened fractionally on the rail. "It's her," Thorne would overwatch, held that ridge alone when the patrol was pinned, took out 3 hostiles before exfil. Brooks nodded, his whisper barely audible. "Saved my arse that night. Fog like this one. She vanished after, orders from above." The regiment's code bound them to silence, but the exercise's pressure mirrored that long-ago op, the parallels too stark to ignore. Down on the plain, the scenario escalated, opposition reinforcements closing the noose, umpires marking multiple casualties. Jenkins' team fell back under simulated fire, the lance corporal coordinating a bound to cover, sweat streaking his face. "Hale, Overwatch, we've got movement on the left, neutralize if clear." Her response was immediate, a blank round dispatched that drew an umpire's wave. Effective. But the pressure peaked as a flank collapsed, hits forcing a full retreat. Hargrove's voice urged consolidation, the major directing from the center, his posture erect amid the chaos. It was then, as the convoy bunched defensively, that Thorne made his move. He rose from the post, Brooks at his side, descending the rise with purposeful strides. No rush, no announcement, just the quiet authority that parted the ranks without a word. They reached the perimeter as Jenkins' team reloaded, the lance corporal glancing up mid-order, irritation flickering anew at the sight of Hale's distant figure. "Still playing statue up there," he muttered to Ruiz, the words carrying just far enough. Thorne arrived at the command knot, Hargrove turning to him with a raised brow. "Captain, input?" But Thorne's gaze fixed beyond on the rise where Hale held. He keyed his own radio, voice low but carrying over the net. "Overwatch, this is Observer 1. Cease fire. Stand down to my position." The company paused, confusion rippling, Hargrove's eyes narrowing, Ellis freezing mid-gesture. Hale complied without query, slinging her rifle and descending, her boots striking the turf in measured steps. She approached the group, posture impeccable, eyes meeting Thorne's with the steady calm of recognition unspoken. The captain waited until she halted before them, the ranks forming a loose semicircle, Jenkins wiping his brow, Carter and Ruiz exchanging glances, Hargrove's pen still in hand. Thorne's team flanked him, Brooks' expression a mask of restrained gravity. "Private Hale," Thorne said, his tone even, pitched for all to hear. "Your form on that rise, textbook. Reminds me of a night in the Balkans, fog thick as this plains. Operation Thornwood. You were overwatch for a patrol that night, held the line when it mattered, saved lives, regiment lives." Silence fell like a dropped pin, the blank's echoes fading into the wind. Jenkins' face drained of color, his mouth parting soundlessly. Ellis straightened, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. Hargrove's notebook lowered, his gaze sharpening on the scar now visible as Hale removed her glove at Thorne's subtle nod. "That mark," the captain continued, voice steady, "field stitch from exfil. You neutralized threats under fire, bought us the window to pull out, classified, but not forgotten in Credenhill." Hale stood motionless, her expression reserved, eyes locking with Thorne's in a moment of shared history. No words needed, just the quiet acknowledgement of debts repaid in silence. The company froze, the hierarchy's rigid lines blurring as shame crept through the ranks, the mockery, the grab, the underestimation laid bare. Ruiz shifted uncomfortably, Carter's eyes widening in awe. Jenkins met Hale's gaze for the first time without edge, a nod forming, subtle, internal. Thorne raised his hand in a salute, crisp and unadorned, holding it until Hale returned it with equal precision. No speeches, no dramatics, just the regiment's respect, transformative in its restraint. Hargrove followed suit, the major's posture snapping to attention, the gesture rippling outward. Ellis saluting, then the sections, a wave of stillness that honored the hidden past now public. The plain seemed to hold its breath, the rain threatening anew. But the moment etched itself. Injustice confronted not by outburst, but by revelation's quiet weight. Thorne lowered his hand first, turning to Hargrove. "Carry on, Major. She's one of ours, always was." The exercise resumed at the umpire's call, but the rhythm had shifted, whispers of Thornwood threading the net like fog lifting. Hale returned to her position, rifle shouldered, the scar a badge now seen. In the ranks, respect rose unbidden, the British way reclaiming its honor through deeds long shadowed. The exercise dragged into its final hours, under a sky that had cleared to a pallid blue, the sun casting long shadows across Salisbury Plain's undulating turf. The opposition force, their simulated assaults blunted by the convoy's reformed perimeter, withdrew under the umpire's signals, leaving behind a haze of spent blank cartridges and the acrid tang of cordite mingling with the damp earth. Bravo Company's vehicles idled in a loose formation, engines ticking as they cooled, While soldiers emerged from cover to regroup, rifles slung, faces streaked with sweat and mud, the weight of the day's maneuvers settling into their limbs. Private Hale descended from her vantage on the western rise once more, her steps measured, the L-115A3 balanced across her shoulders like a yoke she bore without complaint. The scar on her hand, now ungloved and exposed to the light, seemed to draw the eye of every man who glanced her way, though none stared openly. In the British ranks, such scrutiny was reserved for superiors, not shared burdens. Captain Thorne stood at the heart of the knot near the command vehicle, his SAS cadre arrayed behind him in a loose arc of quiet vigilance. Brooks with arms folded, Vance adjusting his radio pack, Reed scanning the horizon as if threats lingered in the barrows. Major Hargrove had called a full halt, the umpires conferring nearby with clipboards in hand, their whistles silent for the moment. The company formed up instinctively, a semicircle of khaki figures under the plane's vast canopy, the hierarchy reasserting itself even in pause. Sergeants to the fore, privates filling the flanks. Jenkins lingered at the edge of his fire team, his posture less assured than before, the lance corporal's earlier mutterings about Hale's statue act now a ghost in his expression. Ellis stood sentinel beside him, a subtle hand on his shoulder guiding without words. Thorne waited until the murmur of the ranks ebbed, the only sound the faint creak of leather webbing and the distant call of a curlew wheeling overhead. He turned to Hale as she halted before him, her eyes meeting his with the steady poise of one who had faced worse silences in fog-choked valleys half a world away. "Private Hale," he said again, his voice carrying just far enough to encompass the company, pitched in that even timbre honed by briefings in Credenhill's shadowed rooms. "What happened on Thornwood wasn't just Overwatch. You embedded with us." Intelligence liaison turned spotter when the lines blurred. That ridge in the Balkans, November the 9th, patrol pinned by militia, exfil route compromised. You held position solo, neutralized the spotter team at 800 meters through zero visibility. Gave us the window to extract 3 operators, including myself. Without your call, we'd have been overrun. The words landed like rain on parched ground, absorbing into the stillness without splash. Hale's expression remained reserved, a faint tightening at the corners of her mouth, the only concession to the weight of memory. The night of chilled wind through pine, the crack of her rifle swallowed by the mist, the urgent whisper of the SAS medic stitching her graze as rotors thrummed distant. She nodded once, minimally, her gaze holding Thorne's in silent affirmation. No elaboration. The regiment's code demanded discretion, even in revelation. Hargrove stepped forward, his notebook set aside on the Land Rover's bonnet, the Major's face a study in restrained recalibration. "Captain, this changes the context." His tone held no accusation, only the professional pivot of command acknowledging new intelligence. Thorne inclined his head. "It does, sir. Her records redacted for cause. Post-mission reassignment to logistics was protective, not punitive. But here on this plane, it's clear. She's carried the regiment's standard in silence longer than most." He paused, eyes sweeping the ranks, lingering on Jenkins, whose flush deepened under the scrutiny. The lance corporal stood rigid, the grab of the rucksack strap replaying in his mind's eye, a breach now magnified by the truth of her service. Ellis broke the hush first, his sergeant's voice low but firm. "Understood, Captain. Private Hale's been solid in our section. Overwatch today proved it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the non-commissioned officers, Carter nodding vigorously from the flank. Ruiz's eyes wide with the dawning respect of youth. But it was Thorne who sealed the moment, raising his hand once more in salute, not the formal parade ground snap, but the measured gesture of peers across divides. Hale returned it, her arm steady, the exchange a bridge from shadowed ops to this open ground. Hargrove followed, his salute crisp, posture snapping to attention. Then Ellis, the gesture cascading through the sections like a wave across the downs. Even Jenkins lifted his hand, hesitant at first, then firm, a private atonement in the rank's unyielding code. The company held the salute in collective stillness, the plain's wind whispering through the gorse, carrying the faint scent of heather crushed under boots. Shame threaded the air subtly, the mockery in the net. the tug on the strap, the underestimation of her quiet competence, all laid bare not by rebuke, but by the stark light of her hidden legacy. No voices rose in apology. British restraint forbade it. Instead, postures shifted, shoulders squaring, eyes meeting Hale's with newfound regard, the hierarchy bending just enough to honor what it had overlooked. Thorne lowered his arm, the moment dissolving into motion as the umpires signaled resumption. "Carry on the exercise, Major. But note this for the AAR. Integration isn't just policy, it's recognizing the unseen." Hargrove nodded, retrieving his notebook, his orders resuming with a clipped efficiency that masked the transformation. "All units mount up. Final push to extraction point." The convoy stirred, engines growling back to life, squads falling into their rhythms with a subtle alteration, Jenkins issuing directions without edge, Ruiz offering Hale a quiet, good shooting as she passed, Carter falling silent on the banter that had once targeted her fog. Hale rejoined her vehicle, sliding into the cab beside Ellis, the rifle secured across her lap. The sergeant glanced her way, his expression one of quiet solidarity. "Well held, Hale, as always." She acknowledged with a nod, her focus returning to the horizon as the column lurched forward, the plane's tracks unspooling before them. From the tree line, Thorne's cadre watched the departure, Brooks murmuring, "She's earned her place twice over." The captain said nothing, his gaze lingering on the lead Land Rover until it vanished into the distance. As the day waned, the exercise concluded without further incident, the umpires declaring a clean extraction under simulated pressure. Back at the bivouac, the evening routines unfolded with an undercurrent of change. Mess tins passed without the usual jabs at the quiet one, Jenkins pulling up a chair near Hale during the cookhouse queue, his conversation turning to tactics rather than jest. Whispers circulated in the bell tents, not of mockery, but of Thornwood's echoes, her name threading conversations like a call sign long dormant. No fanfare marked it. The British Army absorbed such shifts into its fabric, respect earned through deeds, not declarations. In the quiet of the sergeant's mess later, Hargrove reviewed the logs with Ellis, the major's pen pausing over Hale's entry. "Amend her evaluation, commend for overwatch and historical context." Ellis nodded, the weight of command shared in silence. Across the camp, Hale cleaned her rifle by lantern light, the scar a faint gleam under her touch, the day's revelations settling like dew on the canvas. From that moment, she became more than the section's marksman, a quiet legend in Bravo Company's annals, her silence now a mantle of honor rather than isolation. Salisbury Plain darkened under a canopy of stars, the rain holding off as if in deference. In the ranks, discipline endured, its rigid lines tempered by the moral courage that bound them, silent, internal, expressed in the steady eye contact across the fire, the unspoken nod that affirmed what was hidden had found its due, and the regiment's shadow stretched long over the plain. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Laura Hale reach those who still believe in honor. The days following the revelation on Salisbury Plain unfolded with the unhurried rhythm of military routine, the plain's vast expanse serving as both witness and confessor to the subtle shifts within Bravo Company. Dawn broke each morning with the same predictability, the low hum of generators stirring the bivouac to life, the scent of brewed tea wafting from the cookhouse, and the crisp commands of sergeants echoing across the gravel parade. Private Hale moved through it all as she always had, early riser, rifle at her side, her presence a quiet constant amid the company's preparations for demobilization and return to Bulford Camp. But now the air around her carried a different weight, not of isolation, but of measured regard. Sergeant Ellis noticed it first in the small details. The way Jenkins no longer filled the silences with pointed jabs during kit checks, his banter redirecting to tactics or the weather with a deference that bordered on deference without excess. During the morning muster, as Hargrove inspected the sections under the pale light filtering through scattered clouds, Jenkins stood a pace further from Hale than before, his eyes meeting hers only briefly, a nod acknowledging the embankment's shadow without words. "Morning, Hale," he said once, voice low as they fell in, the greeting simple but stripped of its former edge. She returned it with her usual nod, no more her posture erect. The scar on her hand now a subtle emblem glimpsed during rifle drills rather than a hidden mark. The company packed the temporary camp with mechanical efficiency, lorries loaded under Ellis's supervision, the plane's mud yielding grudgingly to the wheels as they retraced the rutted tracks. Whispers had begun in the evenings. Around the flickering lanterns in the bell tents, fragments of thornwood filtering through the ranks like mist rising from the Y. Carter, the young private, shared what he'd pieced together from the debrief's echoes. Heard she was with the regiment once, saved a whole patrol in some fog up north. Balkans, was it? Ruiz nodded, his Spanish accent softening the words, eyes wide with the awe of one still finding his footing in the infantry. Quiet sort, but that's how it's done, innit? No fuss. No one pressed for details. The classified veil held, but the respect it implied seeped into the fabric of their interactions, turning Hale from the overlooked Overwatch into a figure of quiet legend. Back at Bulford, the transition to garrison life amplified the change. The barracks stood squat and unyielding against the Wiltshire Downs, their red brick facades weathered by decades of comings and goings, the parade square a sea of polished boots under the sergeant major's eagle eye. Hale's section reintegrated into the battalion cycle, range days at the nearby butts, classroom briefings on evolving threats, the occasional night exercise under the sodium glow of floodlights. In the armory, as she cleaned her L115A3 with the same methodical strokes, Ruiz approached one afternoon, hesitating before speaking. "That plain business, fair play. If you ever want a spotter, I'm your man." His offer hung sincere, no undercurrent of obligation, just the extension of mateship forged in revelation. She glanced up, her eyes steady, and murmured, "Appreciated. Next time out." It was enough. In the British Army, bonds formed in such restrained exchanges, not grand gestures. Hargrove's influence ensured the transformation rippled upward. During the after-action report presented to Battalion Command, the Major's notes highlighted Hale's contributions without embellishment. Overwatch exemplary under duress. Historical service noted. Recommend accelerated requalification for specialist roles. No fanfare accompanied the commendation, slipped into her file with the quiet efficiency of administration, but it reached the right desks. Whispers evolved in the officers' mess, Thorne's input from Credenhill adding weight. A discreet endorsement for potential attachment to joint operations, her redacted past, now an asset rather than an anomaly. Ellis, overhearing fragments during a staff huddle, felt a quiet pride swell, not for drama, but for the system's correction, the hierarchy bending to honor what it had once obscured. Evenings in the NAFI brought the most tangible shift. The wooden hall, with its scarred tables, and the perpetual haze of cigarette smoke from the designated corner, had once been Hale's periphery, a solitary pint at the bar's end, gaze fixed on the middle distance. Now, as the company gathered post-drill, Jenkins slid onto a stool nearby during one session, nursing a lager with deliberate casualness. That grab on the plane, out of order, won't happen again. His apology came flat, eyes on his glass, the Welsh lilt carrying sincerity without excess. Hale met his look evenly, her response a simple, "Water under the bridge." No embrace, no elaboration, just the release that allowed the section to reform tighter. Carter and Ruiz joined soon after, conversation turning to sniper qualls and the plane's fog, Hale contributing sparingly, insights on windholds, scope adjustments, her words valued now as earned wisdom. Thorne's cadre had departed the plane without ceremony, their Land Rovers vanishing into the lanes toward Hereford, but their shadow lingered. A brief from Credenhill arrived weeks later, unheralded, an invitation for Hale to observe a selection phase, no commitment required. She attended in civilian kit, blending into the tree line as candidates endured the fan dance's grind, her presence noted only by Brooks, with a subtle salute from afar. No words passed. The regiment's respect was eternal, expressed in opportunities rather than accolades. Back in barracks, she resumed her watches, the quiet competence that had defined her now amplified. A legend whispered in the ranks during quiet moments, over tea in the cookhouse in the steam of the showers after PT. The transformation was internal, as British as the clipped orders on the square or the rain-slicked paths of the camp. No plaques marked her door, no promotions rushed. Hale remained Private Hale, her bunk in the women's block unchanged, her routine unbroken. Yet in the eye contact across the mess hall, the nods during formation, the absence of mockery's echo, respect had taken root. Jenkins led his fire team with a steadier hand, drawing on her overwatch lessons. Ellis assigned her lead on the next plane rotation, trusting her fog-born instincts. Hargrove, reviewing evals under his office lamp, paused over her page, a faint smile ghosting his features. The officer's quiet satisfaction in justice served through discipline. Salisbury Plane's legacy endured in these subtleties, a testament to the moral courage that bound the ranks. In the British military, honour was not proclaimed but embodied. In the reserved glance, the unspoken debt, the silent honour that outlasted the fog. Hale walked the barracks paths with the same unassuming stride, her scar a private talisman, the company's regard a shield forged in revelation. The downs rolled on, indifferent, but within the wire, transformation whispered of a deeper order, one where quiet professionalism prevailed, and the hidden past illuminated the path forward. Months passed since the fog-lifted revelations on Salisbury Plain, and Bravo Company settled back into the steady cadence of garrison life at Bulford Camp. The Wiltshire barracks, with their orderly rows of red brick blocks and the ever-present parade square worn smooth by generations of boots, absorbed the company's return without fanfare. Mornings began with the sharp blast of the bugle at reveille, followed by the clipped routines, physical training under the sergeant major's unyielding gaze, weapon drills in the armory where the air hung heavy with gun oil and brass polish, and briefings in the lecture hall's tiered seats, maps unrolled across trestle tables. Private Laura Hale moved through these days as she always had, unassuming, her slight frame cutting a path from the women's block to the sniper range, the L-115A3 often slung over her shoulder like a familiar companion. Yet the undercurrents had shifted irrevocably, her presence now a quiet anchor rather than an overlooked shadow. Sergeant Ellis observed the change in the section's dynamics during their first post-plane exercise, a night patrol simulation across the camp's perimeter wire. Jenkins, leading his fire team through the moonlit scrub, deferred to Hale's input on overwatch positions without a trace of the old hesitation. "Hale, your call on the ridge. Winds quartering from the east, yeah." His question came level, the Welsh lilt carrying professional curiosity, no undercurrent of jest. She nodded, adjusting her scope with economical precision, her voice emerging low over the net. "Affirmative. Hold 2 clicks right." The team executed without murmur, Ruiz and Carter falling into rhythm beside her, their earlier wide-eyed awe tempered into steady reliance. No one referenced Thornwood outright. The classified veil held firm, but its echo lingered in the way they positioned her at the section's fore, her scar a subtle mark glimpsed during kit checks, now met with nods of unspoken respect. In the mess hall, where the clatter of trays and the aroma of shepherd's pie filled the long evenings, the transformation etched itself into the everyday. Hale took her meals at the communal tables now, rather than the solitary corner. Private Carter sliding a mug of tea her way during one shift. "Spot on with that hold last drill. Taught me a thing or two." His words were casual, the young recruit's admiration expressed through action rather than effusion. She accepted the mug with a brief "cheers," her eyes meeting his in that reserved eye contact that conveyed volumes without excess. Jenkins joined them sporadically, conversation turning to the plane's lessons, fog tactics, perimeter holds, his contributions laced with a deference born of atonement. The grab on the rucksack strap, once a raw fracture, had dissolved into the rank's forgiving machinery, addressed not by formal reprimand, but by the quiet recalibration of mateship. Major Hargrove's oversight ensured the legacy permeated upward, his influence felt in the battalion's administrative hum. During a routine evaluation board in the officers' mess, with its oak-panelled walls and the faint scent of pipe tobacco from the adjutant's corner, he advocated for Hale's advancement without dramatics. Private Hale's service warrants specialist attachment, Overwatch credentials exemplary, with prior operational depth. The words, delivered in his measured baritone, carried weight. The board nodded, amending her file accordingly. No medals followed, British restraint shunned such displays, but a posting offer arrived soon after. Observer role with a joint task force. Her redacted past now a credential rather than a burden. Thorne's endorsement from Credenhill, routed through secure channels, sealed it. Asset confirmed. Quiet professionalism intact. Ellis pulled her aside after the notice. In the armory's dim light where rifles stood racked like silent sentinels. Well-deserved hail. Sectional miss your eye. But we'll manage. His tone held the sergeant's steady warmth, a hand extended in brief clasp, glove to glove, the scar brushing fabric. She returned the grip, expression neutral. Duty calls. Keep the flanks tight. It was their way, internal, reserved, bonds forged in the subtle press of shared resolve. Back in the barracks, whispers evolved into quiet legend. Hale's name invoked during post-PT cooldowns, not as gossip, but as exemplar. Like that sniper on the plane, Carter would say to new arrivals, Ruiz adding, held the line when it counted, no fuss. Jenkins, overhearing, would grunt agreement, his leadership sharpened by the lesson, fire team drills executed with renewed cohesion. The NAFI evenings reflected the deeper change, the wooden hall's scarred benches hosting gatherings, where Hale's input drew the group. One night, as rain drummed on the tin roof, a Hereford-like patter far from the Y, Jenkins raised a pint in casual toast. To the fog that cleared things up, laughter rippled, light and inclusive, Hale lifting her glass in minimal response. The moment passing without elaboration. No apologies lingered. Honor restored itself through conduct, the rank's rigid hierarchy yielding just enough to embrace the moral courage that had surfaced. Across the wire at Credenhill, Thorne reviewed selection footage under the base's low lights, Hale's brief visit a footnote in the regiment's annals. Brooks, passing in the corridor, nodded. She's carried it well, legend in the making. Thorne's reply was a fractional smile the SAS way, recognition in stillness, legacy in the unspoken. In Bulford's quiet hours, as the parade square gleamed under floodlights and the downs rolled dark beyond, Hale walked the paths alone, rifle secured, the scar a faint line against her skin. The transformation was complete, not in grand gestures, but in the eye contact across the square, the nods during formation, the absence of mockery's chill. British discipline endured, its silent honor a bulwark against injustice, where quiet professionalism illuminated the hidden paths of courage. Salisbury Plains fog had lifted, revealing not just a sniper, but the enduring spirit of the ranks, reserved, resilient, forever bound. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of Laura Hale. See you in the next one.